its own debut onto the PlayStation 4 with 1080p graphics and 60 frames per second. This was Naughty Dog's first IP away from the Uncharted trilogy, which took place in a post-apocalyptic world, which was an action-adventure survival horror game that followed the story of the protagonists Joel and Ellie as they crossed the country to deliver Ellie to a safe location. It's all easy said than done, but obviously through your adventures of trying to cross the country, you encounter different enemies, different foes, different allies, in duration of the whole story, which actually develops the characters within the game. Very, very good game. At number 8, we have Destiny, selling 5.62 million copies. Creators of the Halo series make their first appearance on the PlayStation platform in the form of an FPS with RPG and MMO elements. The game takes place in a mythical science fiction world. The main concept of the game is you play as a guardian and you're supposed to defend the Earth's last safe city from alien races. Among mixed reviews from critics and players alike, the game still received updates via DLC to keep gamers coming back and selling over 5 million copies. At number 7, we have our first sports game, FIFA 15, selling 6.57 million copies. The football game, or as we call it over here in the States, a soccer game. Sorry about that, my international viewers. If you've never played a FIFA game, the best way I can describe it is it's an actual football/soccer game where you actually can play against, members online with your friends, pick a team, have a match. That's about it. Obviously, there's a lot of different alliterations within the game besides just the matches and the tournaments. Obviously, you can go ahead and build a career. You can go ahead and have a season within the game, play against other members online, as well as goofing off by playing some of the miniature practices and activities within the game. At number 6, we have Fallout 4, selling 6.71 million copies. Amongst a high expectation and anticipation, Fallout 4 was the first to arrive to the next-gen console. Fallout 4 takes place in the post-apocalyptic Boston City in the year 2287. The game takes place 210 years after the devastating nuclear war, where you, the player, get to emerge from a vault and subsequently explore the remains of the world. The open-world liberty and element allows you to explore and discover new gadgets and gizmos, as well as different characters and different abilities within the game. At number 5, we have Star Wars Battlefront, the 2015 edition, selling 7.47 million copies. Battlefront is an action shooter which was actually the third major release from the Star Wars sub-series and considered to be a reboot as opposed to a sequel. And despite the high expectations the game received and the mixed reviews upon release, the game managed to sell a pretty decent amount of copies, 7.47 to be exact. Players traverse from planets from the Star Wars trilogy, and rather than having a story of its own, actually reinterpret stories and battles from the series with familiar characters, surroundings, and environments. And despite the online and mixed reviews that the game has received, a lot of players seem to come back with the online multiplayer component, having more content to play on. At number 4, we have the notorious Call of Duty series with Advanced Warfare, selling 7.57 million copies. The Call of Duty series in general has been a huge impact within the gaming industry. Whether you do like it or dislike the game in the series, the fact that it's actually been able to create a huge community within the online multiplayer component has definitely set a new standard for a lot of new games that come out. This was among Sledgehammer's first attempt to actually make a Call of Duty game, and they were successful in doing so. Advanced Warfare is a military science fiction FPS that takes place in the years 2054 through 2061, which follows the protagonist Jack as a U.S. Marine Corps and his interactions with Atlas, a private company corporation that sells its services to the highest bidder. With Call of Duty's well-known and established online multiplayer, Advanced Warfare is no exception of being a best-selling game on the PlayStation 4. At number 3, we have another FIFA game, FIFA 16, selling 8.03 million copies. The main component or difference between FIFA 15 and FIFA 16 has to be the update within the player's allocation when it comes to the clubs that they play for, the stats of each individual player, and, the international teams, and that's about it. EA has been very successful with just updating the game briefly and being able to actually prepackage the game by selling it $60, and people would still buy it and eat it up. Among there being just a few different alliterations, with there being a better, robust online multiplayer experience, graphic design, and just small little details, FIFA 15 and 16 aren't necessarily all that different, but our fans across the pond love their FIFAs, don't you guys? At number 2, we have Grand Theft Auto 5, selling 11.15 million copies. A remake from last generation's blockbuster game, Grand Theft Auto 5 makes its own debut onto the PlayStation 4 platform, and being able to repackage itself with 1080p graphics, 60 frames per second, and the first-person perspective, which also included small improvements within the game when it came to graphics and any sort of glitches that it may have encountered, as well as a more robust and increasing the cap of the online multiplayer component. If you never played a Grand Theft Auto game, essentially it's an action-adventure game where players complete missions with set objectives, but also gives you the liberty to actually free roam within the city, that being Los Santos in Grand Theft Auto 5. In hindsight, Grand Theft Auto V is huge and massive in comparison to the previous iterations of the Grand Theft Auto series. With more character development and interactions within the Grand Theft Auto game, with a more robust and comprehensive online multiplayer experience, Grand Theft Auto V is no exception to being a great Grand Theft Auto game on the PlayStation 4. And the #1 best-selling PlayStation 4 game is, drumroll please, is Call of Duty Black Ops 3, selling 13.26 million copies. It's crazy to think that a Call of Duty game has been able to sell a lot, millions upon millions of copies within the PlayStation platforms, and whether you do like or dislike the series as a whole, the fact that Activision's been able to actually be successful in these past games is evident of its attraction with gamers that it has. Now, obviously, the brand new Call of Duty game may not receive the same attention and likes of the players and gamers alike, but Call of Duty Black Ops 3 was able to still grasp the remaining players that definitely still like Call of Duty. Black Ops 3 takes place in the year 2065, where the fictional world faces climate changes and advanced technologies, while the world is at a standoff, equipping themselves with high military technologies. The online multiplayer component within the Call of Duty series makes its return with the addition of zombies, making it their first appearance on the new console. Black Ops 3 also delivers in the zombie components, and something that a lot of fans and gamers alike have been liking since the Black Ops 1 iteration. Alright, so this video wraps up the top 10 best-selling PlayStation 4 games of all time. Obviously, the list can be updated within months and weeks after the video has been uploaded. This has been Fever Gaming signing off, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.
$199.99, which is about $440 by today's standards. Now, without the NES being such a success outside of Japan, there's a good chance that all the characters you see behind me right now would have stayed in Japan forever. So if you like any of those, say thank you to the NES. Coming in number 9 now, we have the PSP. The PlayStation Portable was Sony's first handheld gaming console when they released it in 2004, and it sold 80.2 million units in its lifetime. It wowed gamers back then with its ability to not only play games like the rival Nintendo DS, but also play music and videos and store pictures. There were over 700 games released for it, but its most popular title was Capcom's Monster Hunter Portable 3rd. Weird name. When it was first released in America, Sony actually paid graffiti artists to tag PSP art in 7 different major cities to help promote it. Yes, they were given a cease and desist order by the police. That's right, Sony got done for graffiti. Next up at number 8 now, we've got the Game Boy Advance. It sold 81.51 million copies during its lifetime and had no real competition back when it was released in 2001. It simply dominated at that time. Its best-selling games were Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, and it was the successor to the previous Game Boy and Game Boy Color consoles. Now, one interesting thing to mention is that Nintendo were actually working on the Game Boy Advance as far back as 1995, but it wasn't ready to release for 6 more years. And so to make sure that nobody forgot about the whole Game Boy series and got bored of it, they released the Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Advance was codenamed Project Atlantis, which sounds like it could have been a pretty decent game for that console. At number 7 now, we have the Xbox 360. It did a lot better than the original Xbox did and ended up selling 85.49 million copies over the years it was active. It was first released in November 2005 and was still in production until April 2016. Edge magazine puts the console's success down to having its own social network, cross-game chat, new indie games every single week, as well as having some great game exclusives such as Halo. There were also plenty of add-ons such as the Motion Sensing Kinect that helped boost sales along the way. The Xbox 360 was not without its fair share of problems though. Anyone who owned one will remember the notorious red ring of death. As the ring slowly filled up, your Xbox dreams began to die. Next up guys, it seems only fitting that we have the 360's biggest rival that just outsold it at number 6, the PlayStation 3. It sold 86.46 million copies, just a million more than the Xbox 360, with which it had a huge rivalry with over the years. Its most popular game of all time was Grand Theft Auto 5. It was also quite an expensive console when it came out. It was set at $499 for the 20GB model or $599 for the 60GB. But that didn't seem to put people off who were quite enticed by the PS3's powerful processing power. The US Air Force once famously built a supercomputer out of 1,760 PS3s. It was also the first PlayStation to include the wireless DualShock controller. It functioned well as a home entertainment system with both Blu-ray and DVD support, as well as having two different versions that followed it, the Slim and the Super Slim. Yeah, I think eventually Sony realized they need to stop just slimming and chopping down the PS3 and get to work on the PS4. Coming in number 5 now, we have the Nintendo Wii. It's the first on our list to break the 100 million sales mark, coming in at a whopping 101.18 million units sold worldwide. The Wii's success was in how broadly it appealed across demographics. It wasn't enjoyed by just the young or the old, the casual or the hardcore. It had something for everyone. It also succeeded by providing gamers with a real, fresh experience in motion sensing gaming. Game designer Will Wright once said the PS3 and the Xbox 360 feel like better versions of the last, but the Wii feels like a major jump. And the results speak for themselves. Coupled with new versions of Nintendo's classics, the Wii was at one point the fastest selling console of all time. Its most popular games were Wii Sports, Wii Play, and Mario Kart Wii, which helped promote its iconic remote and nunchuck controllers. Moving on to number 4 now, it's the PlayStation. The first one, yes. I don't even think Sony knew what this would lead into when they released it back in 1994. It was originally kind of an accident that it even existed. Sony were actually helping to develop a new type of SNES console with Nintendo, but when that fell through, they started working on their own, and that's the one we know today. The PS1 was surprisingly cheap at its release, coming in at just $299. Atari tried to actually stop them from doing this because they said it was putting American competitors out of business, but the PS1's quality spoke for itself. Games like Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy VII, Gran Turismo, Resident Evil, and Crash Bandicoot, what a game, are just some of the titles that catapulted Sony to the front of the games market. For some gaming historians, the PS1's success was all down to the games. Alright, sitting at the number 3 spot now, we have the Game Boy. No Advance. Now, between the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, this handheld sold 118.69 million copies. The original version was released in 1989 and cost just $97. It had competition from the likes of Sega's Game Gear, but key features about the Game Boy helped it win over the public. Its simple, bland design was a bit deceptive of what really lay below. It had a 30-hour battery life that raised a lot of eyebrows. It also had a rudimentary but pretty successful multiplayer system using cables, and it already had the whole Nintendo back catalogue of games to release from. And then it got smacked with a rainbow when they released the Game Boy Color, which also had faster hardware as well. Between the two of them, they absolutely dominated the 90s handheld market and helped pave the way for Nintendo's future handhelds, such as our number 2, the Nintendo DS. Released in 2004, the DS sold 154.88 million copies over its lifetime. It was the successor to the Game Boy Advance, and the DS actually has two meanings in that name. It means developer's system and dual screen. Now, at the time, the foldable second screen really kind of stood out compared to everything else on the market, but it wasn't really anything new for Nintendo. Many people drew comparisons between the DS and Nintendo's first ever handheld console from 1980, the Game & Watch. The DS managed to retain a lot of young Game Boy fans while also attracting older demographics through clever marketing and the release of games like Brain Training to help improve memory and brain functioning. And if you guys can see the outtakes of this, I probably need that. And the DS is also the best selling handheld of all time because our number 1 spot goes to the PlayStation 2 with 155 million sales worldwide. It's pretty hard to really get your head around just how dominant the PlayStation 2 was back in its heyday. Its main rivals were Nintendo's GameCube, Sega's Dreamcast, and of course Microsoft's Xbox, and it outsold all of them combined. Yeah, and then add about 45 million more on top of that. It's crazy. It was released in March 2000, and initially it got an okay reception from people, but not really the one you'd expect as the successor of the legendary PS1. Soon though, things changed as games like Gran Turismo 3 came out, Metal Gear Solid 2, and then Grand Theft Auto 3 sealed the deal, pretty much. The sheer variety and richness of the games over the years had some people calling it a golden era. In the end, it did age gracefully and bowed out to a new era of consoles, and production was finally discontinued at the end of 2012. Well guys, the PS2 was my absolute favourite console of all time, so I'm glad it made it to the top of that list. But which one of these was your favourite, or did your favourite not make the top 10? Sorry about that. Leave all your nostalgia in the comment section below. Thanks as ever for watching Most Amazing Top 10. My name's Danny Burke, and I'll see all you guys in the next one.